Good evening. Tonight we're interviewing Dr. Stephen Proskauer. He's the author of Karmic Therapy, Healing the Split Psyche. And can you tell us, Dr. Proskauer, what you mean? You have a chapter in your book titled Spiritual Disempowerment. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Sure. That's not a term that everybody uses every day, but I needed to write a whole chapter about this because it comes up a lot in the people I see. People who are frustrated because they know there's something that they're here to do. Sometimes it's a calling that they have towards creativity or spiritual realization.
Right.
Sometimes they have spiritual gifts, but they're afraid to use them, like the ability to help people psychically. There are all kinds of gifts that people have. That sometimes they have dreams that predict the future, but they're afraid to tell anybody about it. All of these gifts and abilities and creativity and productivity go to waste if people are inhibited in using it. And then people feel very frustrated. So where does all this come from? That's what I'm talking about with spiritual disempowerment. And by working with many people, I discovered there were basically three causes for this kind of loss of confidence, you might say, or loss of willingness to pursue your gifts. The first one, and by far the most common, is having been persecuted for the use of these gifts in a past lifetime. Everybody's familiar with torture during the Inquisition, witch burning. Many of these people were very gifted healers. They weren't evil, but they were persecuted because they didn't fit the belief system of the day. And they were scapegoated by the society out of fear and ignorance. But these people learned a lesson that got carried over, which was, it's not safe to use your gifts. You'll get killed. You'll get persecuted. Many people are walking around today who survived that kind of thing to be, or they died then, but they got reincarnated and they still have the gifts, but they're afraid to use them. By going back to those past lives and reliving and releasing, and then asking the question, are the conditions still the same today? Would you be killed if you did this, this, and this? And the answer is usually no. If, for example, the answer is, well, I won't be killed, but I'm sure going to have a hard time, you can ask, well, how can you make it easier for yourself? How can you do this in a smart way so that you can express your gifts and not be persecuted, not be banned, not be ridiculed for what you're doing? We know you're not going to be killed, but it could be a hard life. So how can you do it so it makes sense? How can you do it in an enlightened way?
Yeah.
And that becomes the therapy issue. But first you have to know how it started.
Right.
So then there are a couple of other less common situations that can arise that cause spiritual disempowerment. People sometimes go through spiritual initiations in ancient sects, like the Egyptian priestess initiation or the Central American Indian initiations. There are all kinds of initiations in different mystical traditions that involve going through an ordeal. This is a real test, and sometimes people accidentally die during this. Sometimes they're out of body when they die, and they come back and the body's no longer alive, and they say, well, I'm never doing that again. That wasn't safe.
Yeah.
They make a decision, and from then on, they're not going to go beyond a certain point. They're not going to allow themselves to be initiated into greater power. And then there's another very important one, which is abuse of spiritual power. If someone has a lot of spiritual power, but they misuse it and harm a lot of people, at some point they are going to become aware of the harm that they've done. And oftentimes there's remorse and then a decision or a vow: I will never use my power. I don't trust myself to use my power, because look how I've used it.
Mm-hmm.
Then they become victims and disempowered.
Wow, that's interesting.
There's a lot more to be said about that, and I go into it quite a bit in my book.
Great. Wow. Well, we appreciate you sharing your knowledge on that. And let us tell people that your book is available at razorpages.com. And I appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you very much for your question and for allowing me to talk with you.
Yes, thank you.